When it comes to Pokemon, for most people, the games are probably the first thing that comes to mind. But as for me, well, I'm not like most people. Truth be told, I actually didn't even start playing the games until Fire Red on the Game Boy Advance. I know, talk about a late bloomer. I haven't even played most of the games through to completion with the exceptions of Generations 1, 2, and 6. But back in the late 90s to early 2000s, the games weren't the most important thing because Pokemon was more than just a game. It became a massive phenomenon. And while the games were still at the heart of it all, they received advertisement through all sorts of other mediums, especially on the small screen with a television series, which is what we're going to be focusing on for now. I watched the hell out of Pokemon as a child, but that goes without saying for most Pokemon fans my age or around it. And even though my interests changed as I grew older and I forgot about the show for a long time, revisiting it all these years later has helped me realize that it still has a certain appeal to it and is still entertaining for me to watch today. And no, the appeal is not nostalgia, but I'll explain why, so hold on to that thought for a minute. I can't exactly pinpoint what it is I love so much about the anime in particular, especially when it comes to the first season. Was it the simple concept, the characters, the plot, the writing, the animation? There's just so much to take into account that finding a definite answer to that question would take up a separate video all on its own. Of course you can read the title of the video for yourself, so you know that I'm talking about my favorite episodes of the first season, but I want to make something clear before we get started. I'm not making this list and gushing about my favorite episodes just to raise Indigo League on a pedestal of perfection. While later seasons may have struggled to hold my interest, that doesn't mean I think the first season was as perfect as I may have remembered it being when I watched it as a kid. I may not know what I saw in it back then, but looking at the anime more objectively now, I certainly don't still think it's an untouchable masterpiece. In fact, watching Pokemon again nearly 17 years later when I was making this list, I realized that this season did have quite a few flaws and things that just kind of turned me away that I didn't really notice as a kid. It was actually almost hard for me to pick which episodes are my favorites because, looking back, there's more than a handful of episodes that I honestly just do not like. But the 10 that I love each have something special or unique about them, even if they do have their flaws as well. My point, and yes, I do have one in this long-winded rambling, is that I know people will look at this video and call me a Gen 1er, or biased, or blinded by nostalgia. And maybe that's true. Maybe I am just a Gen 1er because I prefer Gen 1. Who knows? But I'm not making this list to prove that Indigo League was the best season of the anime because I certainly do not believe that. It was littered with animation errors, inconsistencies, and backwards logic in the writing, and some episodes had plot lines that were just, well, kind of boring, to be frank. But then again, I feel that these are problems that the anime has always grappled with in every new season that followed the Indigo League, and I feel one of the biggest reasons I love the X and Y season so much is because it addresses many of the common annoyances that have been plaguing the show for years. That season isn't perfect either, but it's certainly trying much harder. But we're not here to talk about the X and Y season today. Despite all of its imperfections, the Indigo League still has a special place in my heart because of the following 10 episodes. I'm not claiming these ones were the best out of all of them, they're just the ones I can always go back to and personally enjoy. And if I were to recommend the show to anyone who had never seen Pokemon before and had never even heard of it, if such people even still exist, these are the 10 episodes I'd tell them to make sure they keep an eye out for when they're binge watching the show on Netflix. Yes, it's on Netflix. Go watch it. Like, right now. They have, like, all of the episodes. It's so awesome. So, before I waste any more of your time than is necessary, let's start off with number 10. Number 10. The Ghost of Maiden's Peak. This episode is just silly, and that's the reason I love it. For all the episodes that were serious and progressive to the overarching plot of Ash becoming a Pokemon Master, there was more than a handful of episodes that didn't really accomplish much in the grand scope other than goofing around and getting a few laughs in. The writing could be hit or miss, but to me, this was one of the better ones. Ash and the crew attend a Summer's End festival and learn about the legend of the Maiden, where Brock and James quickly become hopelessly infatuated with the Maiden's ghost. So Ash, Misty, Jessie, and Meowth have to join forces to save their love-struck friends. I always felt the funniest moments of the show overall were the interactions that Ash's group and Team Rocket had whenever they joined forces like this, because they had to awkwardly deal with acting outside of their usual roles of good guys versus bad and always fighting over Pikachu. So when they do work together, and I use work loosely, It always brings a smile to my face. Aside from the humorous encounters with the mysterious old lady, we also get a Pokemon battle that defies all logic and reason ever presented in the canon of the games or the show itself. Ghastly conjures up inanimate objects and real-life animals, and for some reason that stuff all counts as legal attacks. And then there's Misty, who single-handedly ends it by proving that she's actually the most powerful Pokemon of all time. Mewtwo and Arceus, eat your hearts out. But what I think this episode is most fondly remembered for is the billboard of a reference to Dragon Ball Z with Venustoys. Yes, Venustoys! Venusaur and Blastoise. Seriously, what the actual fuck? The form comes literally out of nowhere, is only on screen for a few seconds, and has never been referenced again. It was with the Ghost of Maiden's Peak that I honestly felt the writers really just decided to say, screw the rules, we're making our own. And for some reason, I love that. Number 9. Who gets to keep Togepi? Like Ghost of Maiden's Peak, this is another one of those comedy-centric slice-of-life episodes. The only difference here is that this one actually forwards the overall story somewhat by introducing Togepi to the main cast. The egg that Ash quote-unquote finds in a previous episode hatches into Togepi, but he and the gang, along with Team Rocket, are split over who actually gets to keep the hatchling. They ultimately decide to settle the dispute with a Pokemon tournament. This episode is filled with all sorts of random, funny moments, from Jessie and James disguising themselves as egg saleswomen with an accent that is almost offensive, I think, to Meowth's little motherly montage of raising the egg himself, to the actual tournament itself, with Bulbasaur using Lick as an attack before that was even established in the games, and Meowth fighting as his own trainer and Pokemon since he's, well, capable of being both, I guess. I also enjoyed the way the Meowth vs. Brock battle ended, with a funny callback to Ash's gym battle against Brock, by Onix losing to water being pulled from an outside source once again. It's almost like the writers knew how absurd it was the first time for sprinklers to count as part of Ash's win, so they decided to pull something similar again for shits and giggles by giving Meowth buckets of water to use. How is that fair? How? How does that count as Meowth's attack? And why were the buckets of water just sitting there? I will never understand that. Well, I guess they wanted to give Meowth at least a little dignity before he lost. But aside from the gags and weird logic in this episode, I feel the tournament was set up pretty nicely because each character had their own reason for wanting to keep Togepi. It technically was Ash's egg. Brock made the most sense to want it since he knew all about breeding and caring for Pokemon. Meowth actually did help hatch the egg, and when ultimately given the choice, Togepi really just did prefer Misty. At its core, however, it really was just a nice change to see the characters not following their usual routine and competing with each other for a change. Especially since, as was pointed out in this episode, this was the first time Ash and Misty had battled each other since Cerulean City. Even though this battle completely threw all logic and skill out the window. You taste like strawberries. Number 8. Island of the Giant Pokémon. There's really nothing too remarkable about this episode, aside from it rounding off the 3-part mini St. Anne arc, and bringing the characters back to their main quest upon the episode's conclusion. But there is something unique about it that I enjoy. After the sinking of the St. Anne, Ash, Misty, Brock, and Team Rocket wash up on the shore of a mysterious island, where they quickly discover that they've been separated from their Pokémon, who ended up somewhere else on the island. Or just Ash and Team Rocket's Pokémon. I guess for some reason Misty and Brock weren't important enough to lose theirs, but okay. The race is on for the two parties to reunite with one another, and quickly, as they soon realize that the island is inhabited with giant, deadly incarnations of their fully evolved counterparts. And Zapdos, for some reason. I don't get why Zapdos is here, I really don't. In the show's unorthodox nature, an explanation is given for what the island really is, and it's a funny little twist that makes the episode that much more entertaining, assuming this is your first time watching it. But what makes this episode really stand out for me is that this is the first time we get to see the Pokemon interacting on their own without their trainers around. The show may be named after them, but the bulk of the screen time is usually devoted to the humans and trainers, with Pokemon only appearing when the situation calls for them. This was a nice change of pace to see Ash and Team Rocket's Pokemon showcasing more of their individual personalities through their subtitled dialogue. It goes a long way to make them feel less like means to their master's ends and more like genuine characters. I think it's a shame that Pokémon didn't get the exclusive focus like this again until 2005 when Mystery Dungeon came along. As important as the human characters ultimately might be in this show, Island of the Giant Pokémon gave us a little break from the norm and the chance to see the world from the Pokémon's point of view for a change. I just kind of wish the show gave us more of that. That is, outside of the mini shorts that were tied to the movies. In summary, this episode is just a fun little ride with comedy, a hint of mystery, and a refreshing change of perspective. Number 7. Holy Matrimony, Batman! Nah, I wish Batman was in the title. I'm a sucker for character development when it comes to shows with an ongoing plot. Unfortunately, the Pokémon anime very rarely delves into the backstories of its main characters. Holy Matrimony is the exception to that, however. This episode gives us a closer look at James's backstory. We find out that he had a wealthy upbringing, and the reason he ran away to join Team Rocket was so he could get out of an arranged marriage to Jessie Belle. Who was Jessie Belle, you ask? Well, picture another Jessie that out-Jessies the actual Jessie to the point where this new Jessie makes our Jessie seem normal by comparison. When you finally work past how needlessly confusing I just made that, the thought is terrifying. James would have to marry Jessie Belle so he can claim his inheritance. This creates conflict for the team, as Jessie and Meowth really only want the money, while James just wants his freedom. Of course, it's important to remember the light tone of the show itself, so I probably made this situation sound to be taken a lot more seriously than it really is. Ash, Misty, and Brock are barely involved in the drama at all, outside of a simple spectator role, but it is funny to see their reactions to the entire thing. And of course, this episode is another break from their eternal rivalry with Team Rocket. This was really more of an episode for Jessie and James anyway. It was an opportunity to humanize them to an extent without sacrificing the roles that the plot had assigned to them. It was very nice to see that there's more to Team Rocket than just stalking Ash and Pikachu, and if the writers had allowed it, I would have loved to see them explore these characters more and add even more unique traits to their repertoires. The ending was also pretty satisfying, with the pair deciding what's really important to them. I wouldn't exactly say that I ship Jessie and James together, but if you're into that, you could probably interpret the ending that way and find your own satisfaction with it. Number 6. The Ultimate Test. One thing that always really bothered me about Ash's character, in this season in particular, was just how rude, arrogant, and overconfident he could be, especially in the very beginning. He mellowed out in later seasons, though almost to the point where he could be really bland and one-dimensional at times. I guess he just jumped a little too far to the other side of the spectrum. I'm not saying Ash was a terrible character because of his brattiness, however. His stupidity and failures often led to some really funny and memorable moments. And his immaturity can be excused to an extent, since it can apply to anyone really. When you were 10 years old and trying out something new for the first time, it was pretty easy to underestimate the difficulty of the new task. That's pretty typical of all of us when we're young. So watching Ash learn to act with more humility and to approach battling more thoughtfully is something I enjoyed because I could relate to it in a sense. In this episode, Ash's trademark arrogance signs him up for the Pokémon League exam, because passing it would grant him immediate access to the Pokémon League. Of course, anyone could have predicted that the writers weren't going to just toss out the 8 badges plotline altogether, since the whole purpose of the anime was to emulate. I'm sorry, I can't take that seriously. They were attempting to emulate the plot of the games. If Ash actually did pass the exam, the series would have ended a lot sooner. And between money and attempting to remain consistent with the source material, that was never an option. But the writers didn't just make Ash flunk on purpose. His established bumbling character fit into the situation perfectly and managed to tell a pretty entertaining story in the process. The Ultimate Test took Ash's naivety and ran with it in a way that made me love this episode. The actual questions on the exam were pretty trollish, which played off of Ash's incompetence as a trainer, while also keeping the viewers engaged since they aren't questions that even the most well-informed fans could answer from experience alone. The exam is not meant to be taken seriously by any means, but I just find it funny that answering these questions wrong myself could make me feel just as stupid as Ash did. I love this episode though because it helped Ash realize that becoming an experienced trainer takes hard work and dedication, as well as having your own unique style. And as is the case with real life, just because there are shortcuts doesn't always mean you should take them. Sometimes it's just better to get the job done your own way, and for Ash, that meant sticking to earning gym badges. Number 5. Bulbasaur's Mysterious Garden. Let's get the obvious out of the way first. This guy, right here, he's my favorite Mon, like, of all time. So yes, in a way, putting an episode centered around my favorite Pokemon is pretty biased. But let's think about this for a second. Bias means you have an inclination for something over the rest. The only way you can make a decision about anything is to find favor in one of the options and choose said option over the others because of its appeal to you. It's not always a bad thing to be biased. In fact, it's how we make choices, and it's what keeps us from becoming indecisive robots. In the context of this list, where I'm picking to feature the episodes that I prefer or appeal to me, bias is the only way this video can even exist. So even if it were just for this one instance, I don't see any problem here with praising an episode that just so happens to feature my favorite Pokemon. Now, let's talk about the episode itself. Despite my little speech just now, I actually don't love this episode purely just because it's about Bulbasaur. Honestly, that's not even really half the reason. In this episode, Bulbasaur is on the verge of evolving, and the group learns from Nurse Joy about a ritual that takes place in a mysterious garden never seen by humans before. In said garden, a large group of Bulbasaur, wild, or I'm guessing some that belong to trainers, it's not really clear which of the two they are, gather from all around to evolve together in this one place. Ash's Bulbasaur is invited, or rather forced, to take part in this ritual, but everyone soon realizes that he doesn't actually want to evolve. Since Pokemon can't talk, it's never really explained why Ash's one doesn't want to evolve, but that sense of mystery is part of the reason I love this episode so much. It lets the viewers come to their own conclusions as to what Ash's Bulbasaur was thinking and why. I mean, they could have had Meowth spoon-feed us some reason since he's pretty much the established translator, but I guess that would have made sense, and who wants any of that, right? Anyway, I just really love the ambiguous moral that Mysterious Garden presents. Typically, Pokemon are viewed as superior once they're fully evolved because they unlock more of their battling potential. But evolution is a permanent change. There's no going back. And in some cases, such as with Ash's Charizard, the Pokemon's personality changes dramatically from how it was in the previous stage. Maybe Bulbasaur was afraid that evolving would change him into something he didn't like. Maybe he saw how much Charmander changed and didn't want to go through the same thing. And if you're going to say that I'm reading too deeply into this because it's a kid's show, maybe you should shut up because kids' cartoons are allowed to have depth and I'm just having fun talking about something I love. I also felt the writers did a good job with Ash's character in this episode. Ash was excited for Bulbasaur to evolve so that they could access more of his inner potential. But at the same time, Ash never forced Bulbasaur to do something that he was clearly against. Sure, Ash was oblivious to his Pokemon's feelings in the beginning, and because of that, there was a chance for Ash to be a bad guy here and do something wrong due to his naivety. But he didn't. Once he understood the truth, he sympathized and stood by his friend even when no one else did. And it's Ash's care for his Pokemon that does make him more of a likable character. But if we want to just toss out all that poetic junk and bring bias into account here, I'm pretty glad Bulbasaur didn't evolve because I always preferred him over his later stages, and I don't think I would have liked him as much if he actually did go through with evolving. Just being totally honest here. Number 4. Electric Shock Showdown. Ash isn't that great of a trainer, or at least his skill has never been consistent. I think we can all agree to that. While luck can play even just a minor role in any sort of challenge or serious competition, more often than not, skill is pretty darn essential. In the Pokemon universe, gym battles are designed to make trainers really take their battling seriously and earn their victories through skill. And prior to this episode, Ash has been pretty much only coasting along through luck and pity from his opponents. That's why it was nice to finally see Ash having to work hard and fight strategically for once to win a gym badge in Electric Shock Showdown. Ash and Pikachu take on Lieutenant Surge for the Thunder Badge, and on the first attempt, they get thoroughly slaughtered by Surge and his Raichu. And even though the way that Ash ultimately wins the rematch doesn't make the most sense, you have to remember that it's pretty typical for the show to take illogical liberties. It doesn't have to be excused or forgiven for that, but it's to be expected by now. At least in my opinion. You really can't be surprised at this point anymore. But what appeals to me the most about Electric Shock Showdown, and what has earned it the number 4 spot on this list, is that this episode combines the elements I like from the Ultimate Test and Bulbasaur's Mysterious Garden, even though this episode predates both of them by a considerable length of time. When Pikachu loses the first round, Nurse Joy suggests using a Thunderstone to make Pikachu evolve so it can use more powerful attacks, but Pikachu is completely against the idea of evolving. The loss makes Ash and Pikachu reevaluate their relationship as well as their original approach to battling up until this point in the series, and question where to go from here. Like Mysterious Garden, Ash is given the opportunity to further demonstrate his compassion and loyalty to his Pokémon, and how much he values them, not just as partners, but as friends, especially with Pikachu. Ash may want to be a Pokémon master, but as dumb as he can be at times, even he knows fully well that he won't get anywhere if his partners aren't happy to work alongside him. When their morale was at its lowest, this episode was an ideal time for Ash and Pikachu to rekindle their companionship, get back up on their feet, and face their problem head-on once again. And similar to the Ultimate Test, I felt that the incorporation of the Thunderstone option was a great way for Ash and Pikachu to realize that if they wanted to achieve their goals, then it was worth it to do it their own way, even if that means Pikachu will never evolve. When episodes have an aspect about them that I really love, they make this list. When they have more than one aspect, or combine some from other episodes, they rank just a little bit higher. Number 3. This is actually a 3-way tie between Bulbasaur in the Hidden Village, Charmander the Stray Pokemon, and Here Comes the Squirtle Squad. These were the 3 episodes that introduced Charmander, Bulbasaur, and Squirtle to Ash's team, and the reason I included all 3 of them in this one spot is because I can't really pick one episode over the other 2. They're all so similar in plot structure and resolution that none of them really do one thing that much better than the others. Each episode has Ash and the group meet the starter Pokemon, learn a little bit about their backstory, and find a way to earn the Pokemon's trust through conflict that Team Rocket usually creates. If you watch one of these 3 episodes, you've pretty much watched all of them, as despite some small differences, they each play out exactly the same way, with the Pokemon deciding to ultimately join Ash's team. Each starter has a special place in my heart, and because each of their episodes accomplish the same thing, I love them all equally. Though, if I absolutely had to rank them, I'd say I like Charmander's the most because he had the most tragic backstory of the 3, Squirtle's comes in second because of his role prior to meeting Ash being the most unique, and Bulbasaur's is my least favorite just because he was just sorta there. He didn't have a tragic backstory, he didn't have any significant role like Squirtle did other than just helping these other Pokemon. He was just sort of there. I love you, man, but you didn't tell that great of a story. But I still love your episode. I don't know. That doesn't make sense. Moving on! But bias aside, what I really enjoy about these episodes is that I feel they really encompass the overall theme of the anime that the writers were really trying to convey. When people play the Pokemon games, they form a certain attachment to their Pokemon, especially the starters. It's a special connection, and that bonding is something I feel that the anime was trying to convey through Ash and the Pokemon he befriends. As a trainer, Ash sees his Pokemon as his friends, no less than he would see of Misty or Brock. He tries to see the good in all living creatures, and his kindness and dedication rub off on the people he meets. I know this all sounds kind of cheesy, and it is in a way, but I still enjoy watching it because I think it's just nice to watch Ash do good deeds for other people and Pokemon, even if they don't trust him originally, and to see those deeds pay off in the end with a new dependable friend joining him whose trust he's earned. I just now realized that because there are 3 episodes on this list as opposed to 1, that would have to make this top 12, but too late to edit it now. On to number 2. Number 2. Go West, Young Meowth. Hands down, Meowth has the most depressing backstory of any character on the show. Arguably even worse than Jesse's or James or Charmander's or so on. Meowth started out with nothing. Absolutely no one cared for him, not a soul in the world. And despite trying so hard to make a decent living for himself and claw his way to the top, pun surprisingly not intended, it just really sucks that he ultimately couldn't make it. The only people he could ever come to associate with originally was a petty thieving gang of other Meowth. He had to teach himself how to stand and talk like humans, all in the name of impressing some stuck-up female Meowth named Meowsy, and despite all of his hard work, she rejects him. I mean, it's true that you don't always get what you want out of life, no matter how hard you work for it, but Christ, poor Meowth never gets a break. The only home he could ever truly call his own was with a criminal organization, and that was just because no matter what he did or where he went, life was always screwing him over. I wouldn't say Meowth is one of my favorite characters on the show, but he earned so much of my respect with this episode because of how compassionate he was for Meowsy when he saw she had fallen in hard times. He fought the Persian leader of his old gang for her freedom, and even after he won, she still showed no appreciation for him. I mean, what a bitch! I hate and love this episode so much at the same time. It infuriates me because there was no rhyme or reason for Meowth to get screwed over so much in his life. He didn't fall from grace and turn into a villain. He was never given any other option in life to begin with. And that just frustrates me so much. It bothers me to no end. But at the same time, I love this episode because it gets me so compassionate and so loving towards Meowth. It gets me to respect him. In fact, I think I'm more bothered by all of his misfortune than Meowth is himself. He demonstrates in this episode that despite his terrible past, he found his place in Team Rocket with Jessie and James. He might not have the most glamorous life, but it's one that he's content with all the same. He's happy now, and he's willing to move on from it. And that is just amazing to me, that Pokemon could tell a story like that. Meowth received more care, growth, and attention in this one episode than anyone else in the main cast ever did in this season. And even though it is a little disheartening that his true character has never been explored or mentioned again since this episode, at the same time, I don't feel it really needs to be. The ending to this episode brought some real closure to an intricate chapter in Meowth's story, and it was satisfying. In fact, it's the most complete and satisfying story I think the Pokemon anime has ever told. It's even deeper than my number one pick, and in comparison, it doesn't even really seem fair that this episode got beat out by it. This is definitely an episode I don't think any Pokemon fan should miss, even if you're a fan of Meowth or not. And to think it came from Meowth of all characters, that's just surprising to say the least. And my number one favorite episode of Pokémon Indigo League is Snow Way Out. This episode. This motherfucking episode. This episode breaks my goddamn heart every single time I watch it. 17 years later. 17 years! And I still cannot watch it without bawling my eyes out. I hate this episode for playing with my emotions so much, but it's so beautiful that I can't help but love it. So what's the plot of it? Ash, Misty, and Brock get caught up in a snowstorm while traversing through a mountain. Ash gets separated from the group while searching for Pikachu and ends up at the bottom of a cliff. He resolves to use his Pokemon to help dig a cave so they can use it as a shelter to survive the night. It sounds like such a simplistic episode, and that's because it is. Well, the first half is anyways. Think back to everything I've said so far about Ash's character in Bulbasaur's Mysterious Garden, Electric Shock Showdown, and the Starter Trio episodes. Take all of that compassion and good feeling and mix it all together. Then make it suddenly tragic and multiply the new sad feeling by 10, and you get this episode. Inside the cave, when it starts to fall apart, Ash worries about the well-being of his Pokemon and orders them to return to their Pokeballs so they can be safe, healthy, and warm, even if Ash himself is not. Despite their concerns for their trainer, Ash is too stubborn to listen to his Pokemon's objections and is too willing to do anything to keep his friends safe. So he orders all of them to return inside their Pokeballs, including Pikachu. But Pikachu is just as stubborn as Ash. Going beyond his dislike for being contained, Pikachu cares too much to just let Ash die alone in the cold, even if all his friend wants for him and cares about is for Pikachu to be safe. So he stays out with Ash. They all do. Charmander, Squirtle, Bulbasaur, and Pidgeotto. They all huddle together with their friend and resolve to go out together if this is truly to be their last night in the realm of the living. Snow Way Out encompasses everything about the bond that can exist, not just between humans and Pokemon, but between friends. It effortlessly defines the companionship and camaraderie that two beings can share, no matter how similar or different they might be. Their hearts are joined as one, and as long as they have each other, even death is nothing to them. They're willing to sacrifice their own lives, all for the sake of being together one last time. Ghost of Maiden's Peak and Who Gets to Keep Togepi made me laugh. The Ultimate Test and Electric Shock Showdown helped Ash grow into a respectable character that I could appreciate. Holy Matrimony and Go West Young Meowth breathed new life into characters that I otherwise didn't care about and felt that they were one-dimensional the majority of the time. And Island of the Giant Pokémon, the 3 starter episodes, and Bulbasaur's Mysterious Garden delivered in ways that appealed, if not to all fans of the Kanto starters, then just to me as an individual fan in ways that I'm still continuing to understand as I get older. But Snow Way Out is an episode that defines what Pokemon is all about for me. And it even stands to teach how important it is and how wonderful it can be when you have good friends by your side that truly care about you. Pokemon don't have to be real for you to have this kind of devotion and love for other people. And when you have it, there's no amount of fear or suffering that can truly reach you. If you want to make fun of me for saying all of this and for feeling so passionate about fictional characters on a kid's cartoon, do or say as you will. It doesn't change anything about how I feel here. I love these characters and the way they bonded and lived for one another in this one single episode more than any other. I love what this show has taught me about being a good person to others and standing by your friends. My life is still ultimately young, but I will never forget what this anime, no, what this one episode of the anime has taught me. I will strive to be the best I can be, like no one ever was, and surround myself with all sorts of genuine, loving people that I can be happy with. I might not ever find myself trapped in the side of a mountain during a snowstorm on the verge of freezing to death, but it shouldn't take such a situation to make me appreciate the wonderful people I meet in my time. Without any question or any shred of doubt, Snow Way Out is my favorite Pokémon League episode of all time. Okay, be real with me for a second. Did I make you cry? Are your eyes watering right now? Because it was pretty damn hard for me to read all of that with my eyes watering. I'm not even joking. I'm not trying to toot my own horn with my script writing or anything, but I'm just saying that that was pretty intense for me to say all of that. I'm a little broken up right now. So if you're just as broken up as I am, then let's take a moment and just breathe, because I don't want to end the video like that. Okay? Alright, how do you feel now? Better? Good. So that about does it for my 10 favorite episodes of Pokemon Indigo League. I hope you enjoyed it because I sure had a great time making it. I hope I was able to make you laugh, maybe even cry a little, or at least just crack a smile. Because this was fun for me and I wanted it to be fun for you too. But now I'm curious. What are your favorite episodes of the Pokemon Indigo League season? Feel free to leave a comment below or make your own list. Will I do lists like this for all the other seasons? Maybe? I don't know. Depends on if I can remember this time next year to even do something like this, or even care enough to watch the Johto seasons by then. I guess we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Thanks for watching, guys. This has been Brahmestro12, signing off.